Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. Dr. Judy here, Dr. Judy WTF, What the Freud, and we are continuing the theme of becoming more humane. And tonight we have a very, very special, very educated guest, Professor Marc Ellis, who is a theologian and a historian and an author. Professor Ellis, I'll let you elaborate on all the books that you have written. So tonight's topic is we're divided. I've been talking about this for 20 years. My mind map, which many of you are familiar with, illustrates, I'll just show you, okay? Picture's worth 1,000 words. Panel 5. So if you look at panel 5, it's a metaphor for isms. Isms of religion, isms of race, isms of politics, isms of socioeconomic classes. Ism. I don't mind isms, but if we're going to clash and burn and create a holocaust out of our isms, it's not the way to treat our isms. So first of all, thank you so much and welcome. Dr. Ellis is in Florida, so he has stayed up to be with us on the show. Really appreciate it. And so tell me a little bit about yourself and your work and your maybe just a little bit about how you combine theology and history and why you picked those two areas to dedicate your life to.
Well, I'm a native Floridian. And I'm back
Okay.
in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
retired, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
but still writing and speaking and traveling somewhat. And my journey began in North Miami Beach, Florida, and I was a typically Jewish middle class or lower middle class family.
Mm-hmm.
Went to Hebrew school, bar mitzvah and all. Went to Florida State University and ran into the Holocaust theologian Richard Rubenstein, which really marked my life.
Mm-hmm.
And have been a teacher, a professor for many years and written many books on Jewish identity, on Jewish-Christian relations, on justice and peace work, and I've directed institutes in that way. And I've spent a life traveling and teaching and writing, and a very fulfilled life, although the situation is very difficult now.
Yes.
And has been for some time. So
Yes.
not an easy path. And religiously, I'm from the conservative Jewish movement, was bar mitzvahed there, and have my own spirituality within that context.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm observant in my own way. And I've had to interpret spirituality for myself in the way that makes sense for myself, as many Jews and many others have as well, and spent a lot of time in interfaith dialogue. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and traveled all over the world. So I've had a rich life and am enjoying my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But come out every once in a while when needed, especially in situations like we're facing today.
So I have I regard a lot of my questions as pretty naive. I mean it in a deep way. However, I am a bit of an idealist. So my first naive question is, I remember when I was younger, I was an atheist. Nah, there's no God. There's no way. Especially because I found out that God is a man. Like, what? God is a man? No. Maybe if God was a woman, there would be a better chance for me to believe in a woman as God. But God is a man? No, I don't think so. And then I went through this other phase where I became, I would call it, it just helped me to believe in God. It was I had a name for it. It's slipping my mind. But the idea that it doesn't matter if there is, it doesn't matter if there isn't. I want this to be in my life, so therefore I'll make it so. And so I went with that. And then as I grew older, I got to this point where it was just so clear to me that there is God, higher power, a light. And I think where that came from is the amount of coincidences that I have in my life, and they're undeniable, and they're connected, and they sometimes point toward a pathway. And I do believe that my mind map was a direct outcome of my study of Kabbalah, which has helped so many people. I don't see how it could have been from any other source but a higher source. So these kinds of experiences have shifted my thinking to, yes, there is a higher power. So my first naive question to you is, after all the studies that you have exposed yourself to, what, if you will, proof is there from a theologian's point of view that there really is a God? Because a lot of people will say, nah, it's just a made-up thing.
Well, I'm not sure that proof is the way to go, and I don't think you can prove it either way. But I think listening to you, you have a sense of that. Other people have a sense of it, and other people don't. And we just have to be satisfied that it's an open question.
Mm-hmm.
I see possibilities of God and possibilities where God isn't. And I'm not hung up on whether God exists or not,
Mm-hmm.
but whether I see parts of reality in deeper ways at certain moments.
So, of all the bodies of wisdom, and there are lots of bodies of wisdom, wisdom from the Torah, wisdom from the Bible, wisdom from the Quran, wisdom from any source that people of various religions go to source information, is there a common thread that you see?
Well, I think there's a commonality in that people find these different sources within their own cultures and traditions, and they can be shared now, which is one of the beautiful things about our present life. Of course, it's also sometimes a dividing point, and you have to choose whether it's going to divide you or bring you together. But I think the overall ability of us to see more is found in being open to our own experience and to the experience of others,
Mm-hmm.
without trying to define it with a fine-tooth comb, and therefore it becomes more elusive. I think it's something, as I describe it often in my writing, I've experienced elements from somewhere else.
Okay.
And I think that's where I leave it. Although in my private devotions, I can be more specific about God in public, I try to keep it low key, because when you make it too high key, you expose it to hypocrisy. So this somewhere else, it doesn't need to be defined. It's like love.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to define it too much, too fine, it kind of disappears. That's my experience.
Okay. Okay.
God, I think, is the same way, that if we try to experience it in a too definite way, we have an issue.
So I also am aware that different cultures might gravitate toward different isms. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with an ism unless it is used as a wall and an attack mechanism against another. From your point of view, how do we exist on this planet, being that we are divided into all of these isms? How do we exist to, is there any snowball's chance in hell to bring isms to a place where we are sharing and enhancing each other? Or are they just naturally oiled in water?
I think we experience both these walls as a blockage and the piercing of these walls as a possibility of a solidarity and a learning. So we have both.
So,
And sometimes you have moments where there's a lot of solidarity and learning from each other, and other times you have less, and sometimes you have none. and it seems to be a pattern that it doesn't resolve itself, but is open to us as we work toward breaching the walls, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
or hunkering down. And sometimes we need to hunker down, but it's not the best for a long period of time. So the openness is something that we can experience with others. And if that experience goes well, we want more of it.
Do you think that isms can also create synergy? And I'll show you my my metaphor for that one. Excuse me, that would be panel number 7, where all the bubbles come together to create light. And again, in my idealistic world, all of the isms bring to the human race some gift. And through that gift, we enhance each other as human beings. Is that a figment of my idealistic imagination, or from your experience, is that possible?
Yeah, for sure. In different parts of history, you have this synergy. And again, at other parts, you have these divisions. And if you look back in history, a lot of the philosophy or theology that we think is only about one thing or one way came from different sources. So Judaism, for instance, has been influenced by Islam and Christianity has been influenced by Judaism and Islam has been influenced. So there are influences which often we don't really realize because they become embedded in tradition. But when you study it, you say, well, where did this come from? And you think, wow, that's interesting. It came from this source. And you might even be at war with that source today and think back and say, at another time, there was a synergy.
So is there any sort of a I'm a fan of universal truth, whatever that means to whoever. I tend to think of it as different angles of having an aha experience. So when science comes together with philosophy, religion, when these elements come together and they're all pointing the arrow in the same direction, I like to think of that as truth. Some sort of as close as we can get to some universal truth. Do you find through your studies that there are some universal principles that all the listeners tonight and anybody who tunes in later after the show can really utilize as a point of elevating themselves from human or even subhuman to humane?
Sure. For instance, human rights has become a standard that we all think about and we all reach toward, and sometimes interpret it very differently, of course. But you can have universal sensibilities that are approached from particular traditions, and each tradition or each culture might make a contribution to that universality, which transcends that particularity. So I'm very strong on particularity too, including Jewish particularity.
Okay.
But there's a universal outreach within that particularity. And most traditions have that particularity and that outreach. And again, at different times in history, the particularity is more emphasized or the universality is more emphasized. And often that has to do with the political formations that these cultures and traditions are living within. So if the politics is more favorable, religions tend to be more open. And if it's closing down politics, traditions tend to close down. So there's an interplay on this question of universality between the particular and the universality, and politics and culture and food and wealth or poverty. It's not simply there to be taken. It develops and sometimes moves forward and sometimes moves backward and then comes back again.
So you're talking about a system, the different aspects of a system, and different environments create for more open systems, more closed systems. When you talk about particular aspects of religion, are you talking about the traditions and so to speak, the vehicle we use to get to that bigger picture? Like the specific pathways, different
Yes, and of
pathways.
course those traditions can also close down the universal at times, but then you mine the tradition for the universal within that particular, and it's then recaptured and redone and moves toward the universal. So traditions are there to be reinterpreted in every generation and in different cultures. And it can mean the tradition can mean something quite different in a certain time in a certain culture than it did at another time in another culture. And it's still within the same tradition. It
So
may look very different.
so you're saying that it's always morphing.
Yes, of course, it's always moving, and we're the movers. And certain
We
historical moments are very particular movers, and other historical moments are less moving and more static. And then all of a sudden something comes up and the movement begins again.
How important is it, in your opinion, for people to? I make a big deal about stepping into other people's shoes. It's called empathy. Am I?
I think that's a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important, and it helps us actually recover parts of our own tradition, which we, which may have laid dormant or which we rejected, all of a sudden open up through our interaction with others and caring for others. And then things look different in the world to us from our own tradition. Of course, tradition almost always says that's the way it's always been. But in fact, it hasn't always been. For instance, with Catholics in Vatican II, the Catholic Church said, basically, as we've always believed, but in fact, they didn't always believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And in Judaism, we have some beliefs that we had way back when, and other beliefs that we never even considered. In Islam, the same. So tradition always claims that it's one way, but in fact, if you look at it historically, there have been many pathways within all these traditions, especially traditions that have been around a long time.
Do you think, in general, the human spirit is evolving or devolving?
Probably both at the same time.
And what can we individually do? I also emphasize consciousness is causal. I talk about that in my book, Be the Cause, which, by the way, everybody can get a free PDF of. And Maxwell Planck referred to. Consciousness is causal. So if you're in the consciousness of connectedness, we're going to have a different outcome. It's sort of like my mind map is teaching people to use their consciousness to play a better game of life. And so do you have any maybe suggestions on what kind of consciousness people can be in while we are um, clashing and blowing each other up?
Well, that's not a situation that's conducive to opening consciousness because everyone's afraid for their life. In more stable situations, you have more opportunities to open yourself up to others. In unstable situations, you tend to close down.
I think that's beautifully said, because if you look at it from a psychological model, when we are in crisis, when we are experiencing the level of PTSD, I can't even imagine the level of PTSD happening right now, and how many psychologists, therapists, EMDR specialists, yoga teachers, whoever are needed, and not ever enough to really calm down the amygdala. And you're right, when we are in crisis, We are not creative. We're not safe. We're not expansive. We're not solution oriented because our amygdalas are hijacked by fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So there's no generativity, there's no growth.
Well, sometimes crisis can engender growth because you're forced into situations that you never thought you'd be in. It can move either way, in my view. The prophets, for instance, within Jewish life, come when there's a crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe in other traditions too. When you think, well, it'd be better off not to have the crisis, but the question is, what do you do in the crisis? And sometimes you can again hunker down in a very negative way, but there's another pathway with the prophetic that opens you up because of the crisis, because you say, hey, we can't live like this anymore. We've got to move forward. We've got to create new pathways that may have a relation to the old that's been submerged and reified, objectified, and used against change. So crisis, to me, is also an opportunity. You don't want to see,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It illustrated in the mind map, which I use obviously in my work, it would be panel number 6, which is break down, break through. I call it the curse by design. So when we have these breakdowns, as you're saying, they could be tremendous opportunity to shift out of whatever ways we had in the past. So how could we use personally and globally, whatever macro or micro level you want to take it, how could we use this, if you will, break down, curse by design, maybe prophetic, to break through and create something new?
Well, we're confronted ecologically with this crisis around the globe, and the question is whether we will. There are elements where we are and we're not,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of a race to see which one will win out. Often we muddle through, we don't have a clear victory or defeat, but even the muddling through is dependent on some that go further than the world can go at that time. But it's a race to the end, maybe in every generation in a certain way, and we're still here.
So we share the world in common. We're all interconnected. There's no doubt about that. Anything that happens somewhere is going to be, the butterfly effect. We're going to eat it. If we put out radioactive air in one part of the world, there's no doubt that it'll float into another part. So why do you think that we don't have that aha experience and say, whoa, 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 wait a minute, we've got to band together. As a human race, we cannot afford this. We cannot afford to kill our oceans. We cannot afford ecologically this disaster that is the fallout material. So on that level, how come we're not more interconnected?
Well, we are interconnected, but we don't always act that way because there's too much self-interest and too much competition. And there's too much, if I give this away or I don't do this, somebody else will do this and get that. It's very primal and understandable, but we also can rise above that and move in different directions. And again, we'll see what happens. It's not going to be a clear victory and hopefully not a clear defeat. But we who are seeing this interconnectedness have to keep going and keep pushing. And maybe others will come along. And maybe in the end, we'll pull through.
Speaking of poking through, I had my Kabbalah teacher, Avna Madar, on last week, and he was talking about two people who were on a boat in the ocean, and one was drilling away. He was drilling a hole in the boat, and his friend said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, obviously, I'm drilling a hole in the boat." He goes, well, like, you're going to sink us. He goes, don't worry, it's on my side. So, I think about that in terms of the
Good.
world situation. We always think, well, it's on my side. I'm
Well, it's
making
good religious humor.
good religious humor, right? But good philosophical humor too, because if we thought more that way, we'd be a little bit more careful, don't you think?
I think so. But the human race has many sides, and political entities and isms, as you say, and religions, where we want more to ourselves and more truth, claiming more truth to ourselves, and more production and more goods and more armaments. And it's a process of negotiating all of this. And again, seeing where we can come out, negotiating our self interest and the interests beyond ourselves.
How much of a chance do we have to um, put out the philosophy that if we have self interest that benefits others, then we're in the right direction. If we have self interest, like the guy drilling the hole on his side, if it doesn't benefit others, then we're sunk. It amazes me. It also amazes me to think about how much money these wars are costing us. If we took all the money and all the everything, how much money it costs us, also how much money we need to recuperate from it, we could be feeding and thriving and growing and planting and inventing, and our planet would be quite incredible. But it seems like not many realize that, and not many are that invested in that. So is this sort of, I'm a specialist and have interest in narcissism. Is this sort of like a global narcissism that we're facing?
I think you have it in a nutshell, that we have self interest. And the question is, how do we define self interest? Because self interest might be in the interest of others too.
Yes, that's
And the self interest might be only me. So self interest is always important, but the question is, how do you define self interest? And
so
if
I want.
people,
Yes, go ahead.
if people are, we realize even President Kennedy, way back when, realized that if you're going to have testing of atomic bombs and the air is filled with radiation, your self interest of projecting power may be killing you because the radiation goes everywhere. So our self
Exactly.
interest is not having atomic bomb testing out in the open. So it depends how you define self interest.
I think we have to redefine self interest because, again, I'm a fan of the truth. If someone is interested in themselves and that creates chaos and breakdowns and nuclear holocaust for others, that's not going to benefit the self.
Totally. I agree. And many people agree, and some don't agree. And it depends who has the power and the context and what happens or what doesn't happen, sometimes by a mistake or sometimes by somebody just flying off the handle, and others trying to say, we've got to tamp this down, we have to regulate it, we have to guard it so it doesn't get out of hand.
So, how can we as individuals, this whole mind map philosophy started as a concept called Join the Human Race Healing Global Disconnect. And that was way above my grade of how to what I can do on the planet. Imagine healing global disconnect. So I'm I couldn't do that. I didn't didn't do that. So then I went micro. So healing individually so that we can heal globally. So what kind of philosophy can people adopt today, right now, so that they can connect the dots and understand that there is a way to be selfish and also be expansive and synergistic, selfishly synergistic. I'm selfishly synergistic. I have a career called being a psychologist, of putting information out there, of creating videos, helping people to paradigm shift out of their wounds of childhood, specifically narcissism. So I benefit by that. However, other people benefit by that. And if it weren't that way, it wouldn't feel right to me.
Well, I hear you on that. It's a question of how we can navigate our own self-interest and broaden it to the interest of others and combine it within a framework, cultural, religious, political, that helps us keep our eye on the prize.
And how would you define the prize?
Well, the prize is to create political entities, cultural entities, religious entities that try to get us in ourselves and out of ourselves, to ourselves and with others. Some kind of flow that doesn't leave us empty
Mm-hmm.
or only full,
Mm-hmm.
that is not only alone, but also in need of others, and that we're better together, and that we are individually better when we're together.
So if you were to teach a 2-minute course to my audience on how to do that with all your background in history and theology, what would the lecture uh, look like if you were just straight up to say to everybody, right now, what we need to be doing is, in order to have that prize?
Well, I would say that we need to create political, cultural, religious entities or reform them that express our need individually and collectively to move forward in life from human to humane, as you put it, and to embrace each other in the way that we can while still having our own privacy and our own self, which is also a place of creativity, and the larger realm being a place of creativity, and not have them merge completely, but not have them be separate either.
So it's sort of like a healthy me, whatever that me stands for, a healthy political me, a healthy religious me, a healthy cultural me, and then another healthy me, meaning somebody else's politics, religion, culture, together create a healthy we, which is the humane race. Would you say that I would be on the right track there?
Yes, kind of an interdependence
Interdependence, yes. Yes.
that benefits all of us, or more of us at least, and tries to invest all of us, or more of us, in that interdependence. The
So,
more we're invested in interdependence, the better off we're going to be.
so
And the
I
more we fear interdependence, the less off we're going to be.
so fearing interdependence would be predicated on broken trust. I would fear interdependence if I thought that who I was interdepending on would hurt me or take my light. So who do you know how to who do you play with and who don't you play with? Because I want to play with the givers. I want to play with people who have ethics and principles and are interested in the best in me as I am in the best of them and as we are in the best of we. So how do you, so to speak, vet people today so that you know who to interconnect with?
Well, that's always a challenge, and it's never going to be perfect. Otherwise, we live in a perfect world. So we have to cultivate an ability to search out that, the best in all of us, and nurture the best in all of us, realizing that we're going to fall short. And when we fall short, try a self correction.
Yes.
And then, even when we do that, we're going to fall. We need to bring ourselves back up with others. So there's never going to be a perfection in our self interest in the interest of others and this interdependency. And there are always going to be situations where it fails and where people are hurt.
So as
We
long
want to
as
minimize that.
so you're right. It's never going to be perfect. However, if we have our eye on the ball of what you were saying, this this imperfect connect, disconnect, self reflect, and self correct, which is a very important term that I use in my mind map process. If we're constantly doing it, so we're looking at our failures and then we look to ourselves without pointing the finger at the other ism, it's all your fault. And then, of course, they're going to point back, and then there's going to be the clash of the isms. If we just continue to be clean with ourselves and own our own stuff, and everybody adopts that philosophy in their own way, would that be moving would that be moving in the right direction?
I think so. I don't think we can only concentrate on ourselves, but we need to concentrate on ourselves. We also have to be open to the experience of others and being changed by that experience. So, again, that's an interdependence too. We're not only able to be as individuals by ourselves,
I
we need
really,
others.
I really appreciate what you just said. That this idea that we are malleable to being changed by other people.
Of course.
It's very, very important. So that just takes it off of, well, I respect me, I respect you, and so we're just going to be two nice little isms and hopefully we'll interconnect. I think the concept that you just presented, that however you're being is going to, on some level, change me.
Well, of course, that's why you have teachers. That's why you
Yes.
have books. That's why you have art. That's why you have playgrounds. I mean, the whole idea of sports from a very young age, being outside, playing with the kids, kids playing with kids, is
Yes.
this interaction. And of course, with teachers throughout our lives in different ways that we can give, but we also can receive. And in receiving, we're more able to give.
That's very Kabbalistic. You know that.
Well, it can be seen from different viewpoints. And of course,
True.
these mystical traditions in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and other religions have elements of all of this, sometimes in recessed valleys and sometimes very boldly stated. And we mine them, including our cultural traditions and our political traditions.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in the United States, where we've had different times where we're more outwardly looking and
Mm-hmm.
then more inwardly looking, where we're more generous, when we're less generous, when we're mean spirited, when we're good. This comes and goes. It's all within these traditions. If they're long enough and big enough, you've got everything there. It's a question of what you choose within those traditions at a certain time in history, in your own personal history, and in the history of those around you, including locally, regionally, nationally, internationally.
Could you please talk about some of the books that you've written and maybe some of the gems contained in those books?
Well, I've written a lot about Jewish identity and Jewish Christian relations and Muslim relations too, and about the Holocaust and about after the Holocaust. What do we do? What are we able to think? How do we get out of these situations of deep darkness? I've written about people who are prophetic, women and men, artists, philosophers,
Mm-hmm.
who have ideas in their own lives or in their own paintings or in their own philosophy or in their living conditions that help us to move ourselves into deeper realms. And that's one of the reasons I love biographies and I love journals. A lot of my
Mm-hmm.
books lately have been journals where I look at my own life, but then bring other lives and other events into it, not just to look at me or look through me, but to see a person like others opening to different viewpoints and different worlds that are different than mine. And I think that's one way of looking at my writing over time when I look back on it, because I published my first book in 1978. So
Mm-hmm.
I was living among the poor, and that taught me a lot, living among the poor. And you think, what could they teach me? And the answer is a lot. And traveling globally like I have to different cultures, not in Hilton's, but among the people,
Mm-hmm.
what could they teach me? And the
Mm-hmm.
answer is a lot. And one of the things that I've been taught is hospitality, even
Yeah.
among the poor. And what does that mean? The openness to others, even when your situation is dire. And what's the difference between destitution and poverty? There's a big difference. Poverty can have a culture, what we consider poor, and destitution is when you drive a people into the destruction of their own culture. So I think I've learned a lot and written a lot from my travels and my encounters with others, especially others who are not from my tradition. Some they are, and some aren't, and not from where I live, but around the world.
You mentioned hospitality, and I think that that's a real human connector. When you welcome another family into your home, when you simply welcome another person into your environment, whether it's over a meal or over conversation. And I think we're really hungry for that because we could be rich, right? We could have a lot of things, but we could also be very poor. And I call it fulfillment versus fulfillment. So, would I rather sit down at anybody's house and connect with them and have a really heartfelt, juicy, stimulating conversation and a good feeling? Or would I rather just, I don't know, what would be the fulfillment part of it? Go there and watch some great movies and have caviar and champagne. I could tell you what I like. I mean, I like caviar, don't get me wrong. Champagne, I think my heartburn is not in good shape for that. But I really like connection. It's very fulfilling, and I think people need to understand the difference between fulfillment. I call it the drug, sex, rock, and roll. Narcissists, they have what I call the hole in the soul, so they like to fill, and then the fulfillment, which takes the give and the take, the sharing and the caring and the receiving and all of that, and it's a full circle thing, and maybe we will learn to appreciate that more, particularly
Absolutely.
because it's so rare nowadays.
Well, we fear each other in a way that we didn't when I was young, at least in my recollection. We have different kinds of blockages and also different kinds of openings too. So we
Yes.
have both. And again, it depends where we go with it and whether we retreat or whether we continue to move forward and outward. It's a choice often. Sometimes it isn't a choice. Sometimes you need to close down.
Mm-hmm.
But we continually have that choice in different moments to trust others. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes it does, and that's part of life.
So I know that we didn't take any questions. Maybe we can take a question or two. Are there any people in the chat room who want to ask a question? Or you're welcome to call in. We've got so much rich information here that I didn't want to interrupt it with questions. But if somebody has a question, bring it on. Anybody have a question, Tony?
Just comments, just people loving the conversation, but no questions I'm asking them.
Okay. Okay. So my family background, as many of my audience knows, is my parents are from they're no longer. Actually, today's my mother's birthday, interestingly enough. We're having this conversation. She would have been 92 years old, and she was a survivor of the Holocaust. And my grandmother was in the camps. My grandfather sold his watch for Schutzpass so he could become a citizen, a Swiss pass to become a citizen so he can go into hiding. And I think the most remarkable story to me was my father, because he acted like a Hungarian fascist officer. And he said to one of the officers, as his family was lined up in the, I forgot, the ghetto, and he says, "Oh, I want to take care of this family myself. I think I would enjoy a bloodbath." And they said, "Yeah, go ahead." And he took his whatever pistol, I don't know how he got it, and he poked everybody, and he got him out of line, and he took him over to a building where his brother was working and hid him in the basement. I mean, very, very, people are creative. I've got, you know. Why I admire this story for several reasons. I wouldn't be here to talk to you if he didn't do that, number one. But why I admire this is because when I asked him, "Dad, weren't you scared?" He goes, "No, I never felt fear. I just got angry." So my point is that people handle things in totally different ways. And so that's unpredictable, isn't it?
Well, all of these situations lend themselves to unpredictability. And there are many stories from the Holocaust like that in different ways. Some of them didn't work out that way.
That's true.
And some did. And it was a situation that was so tragic that you didn't know which type of behavior would move in any different way. But that was an extreme situation, obviously.
Extreme situation. Yes.
Terribly extreme.
Yes, and what's sad to me is that we're seeming to always be in these extreme situations. I'm hoping that things are going to calm down and people are finally going to evolve and psychoeducate themselves and get emotionally better. And then, of course, my profession allows me to see some of the worst, the child abuse and the neglect and the extreme cruelty that even families have toward each other. And then I start thinking, look, if we can't even get along as a family, okay, if the brothers are hating each other, if parents are divorcing, if domestic violence is in the air, how could we expect to get along globally? Any comments on this?
Well, I think certainly that's a case, but again, we muddle through. And there are people who have broken relationships at one point who develop relationships that are positive at another point. We don't really know why. Things come together, things fall apart, things come back together, or they don't come back together there, but somewhere else. We have to keep going and hope that the good outweighs the bad. And that's also in local, regional, national, and international relations, that things can get broken down and then be mended. And then those can break down and new relations can develop. And some
Absolutely.
New relations that are good are squandered and some break through. It's a gamble, but it's the only way we can be faithful is to keep moving and to keep trying and to do better.
And you really reminded me to allow myself to be affected. I mean, sometimes I get too affected and then I get infected and overwhelmed and overloaded with pain, and sometimes I absorb it. But just to allow other people to affect me and change me, and change my perspective. Be open to that. Don't be so stuck. Don't be so stuck in my own vision of things, because that's my own cracked lens of perception, as I like to call it. Sometimes it is a cracked lens because we're never really seeing straight. If we could look at the big picture, then we would be seeing things on an interconnected level that would touch, move, and inspire us as a human race to behave completely different. But we don't. We're very myopic, as you said. We're selfish. My interest, my land, my air zone. Well, air zone, I don't think there's such a thing because the air flows. There's no zone, there's no boundary on the air. So anything that you'd like to add to this discussion insofar as if you're one of those people, which I believe you are because you've studied so much and you're so interested, just the fact that you're interested and put effort into it, as one of those people who are more of a wisdom master than your average Joe, what are some wisdom principles that maybe you can leave me and the audience with?
Well, I don't think so much about principles as encounters.
I'm sorry, as in what?
Encounters.
Encounters. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
I think we learn mostly through our encounters with others about ourselves.
Okay.
And as we continue to encounter, we grow.
Mm-hmm.
We're sometimes hit back, but we also move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, we get kind of baseline realities that we try to act from and toward, but not perfection.
Not perfection.
Not perfection.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And that not perfection allows us to be open to moving forward. Because if we're perfect, at least in our view, why encounter? Why move?
Yeah.
Why try?
Yeah.
Therefore, failure is part of moving forward if we can keep going.
If we can keep going. I like how you say muddle through, because sometimes that's what we're doing. We're muddling through, and we're not perfect. And you're correct. If we were perfect, we would not have any need to talk to anybody else, because what do we need them for? We already have it all. And that's just so not true.
No, I agree.
So any last minute, do you want to mention some of the books that you've written so that people can resource them?
Well, many years ago, I wrote a book, Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation.
Okay.
And I just published a book titled First Light, Encountering Edward Said and the Late Style Jewish Prophetic in the New Diaspora, and many in between. They're on Amazon and all.
Okay.
And they're basically about my encounters with life, with the Holocaust through reading and being taught, and after the Holocaust, and my travels to Israel and Palestine and around the world. So my books are filled with that. I don't usually make a plan when I write a book. I just start writing. And now I also have, of course, written poetry since I was a child, and paint, which is another way of encountering. Also encountering boundaries, trying to figure out what it means to be Jewish in our time and what it means to be an American in our time and a global citizen in our time. And I would say that's really what my writing and my teaching have been about, with particular emphasis, but which you can read. I often sign my books with hope that you find part of your own story in these pages.
Yes.
So I try to communicate my journey as a way of opening other people to their journey.
That is so artistic. Instead of writing a book on principles and so on. It's just your experience, and your human experience opens up other people to their human experience.
I think that's more productive, at least from my perspective.
I
You can find principles in my writing, people who analyze it, but I want to be free flowing and open to where my thought and my experience goes in relation to myself and to others, and in relation to my tradition and other traditions, and my culture and other cultures, and see where it goes without defining an ending, because it's an ongoing journey.
I find that to be very beautiful and inspirational. And not everything has to fit in a box, and it just could be your personal journey and people reading it and relating to it or not, and being inspired to flow. Just flow with all the traveling that you've done, and the poetry and the art, I think, is other ways for you to flow and explore. So if there are no questions in the chat room, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here tonight and sharing your life, your journey. And I hope people will dig into some of the books that you've mentioned. I'm not a big reader because I get overwhelmed. Any of them on audio or no?
No, they're on ebook and text.
Okay. Well, I'll certainly want to explore what you've written, and I really, really appreciate you being here tonight and adding to the conversation of how to go from being human to being humane. What a huge, huge challenge, especially, I think, in every era, but I think we're feeling it more than ever. And just one quick announcement. I'm Christiana Davidson, my therapist, is going to be leading another webinar November 4, 11, and 18, Sunday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And with that, you get my new video titled Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. And we're going to delve into the wounds of childhood. Specifically, I call it the wound of apathy, because that's the basis of narcissism. If we don't care, then we can do whatever we want to whoever we want, and that is the big problem. So contact me for more about it, and I'll be emailing out information. And again, Professor Ellis, thank you so much for joining me tonight and joining our audience.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our discussion.
Me too. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone.